The road to Pine Hollow cuts through 30 miles of forest, a thin gray ribbon swallowed by pines. Early that Friday, the hum of tires carried 5 college friends toward what was supposed to be their last carefree weekend before real life began. Ryan drove. Brooke rode up front with the map app open, joking about getting lost. In the back, Elijah, Tessa, and Dylan argued over playlists and gas station snacks. They filmed a short video at the highway overlook, wind in their hair, laughter echoing, ending it with a promise. See you Monday. The cabin waited at the edge of an old logging tract, a place Brooke had found online. Reviews said it was rustic but safe, an hour from the nearest town. They arrived just before sunset. The structure stood 2 stories high, weathered cedar and a wraparound porch. Behind it stretched endless forest, trees so dense that daylight thinned even at noon. They unpacked, lit a fire, and made dinner, spaghetti from a single pot, laughter filling the air. Photos from that night later became the timeline's last fixed point. 5 smiles, 1 flickering flame, and darkness beyond the porch rails. Neighbors at a nearby property recalled hearing music that night, faint but cheerful. Sometime after midnight, the playlist stopped. No one remembers hearing cars, footsteps, or voices after that. When the owner came by Monday to collect the rental key, the cabin was locked from the inside. The cars were still parked in the drive, food half-eaten on the table. Authorities were called within hours. Sheriff Cole, a 30-year veteran, later told reporters that it was one of the strangest initial scenes he'd walked into. Nothing violent, nothing stolen, just absence, he said. Cell phones, wallets, and backpacks lay neatly on the couch. One mug still steamed from the thermal heat trapped inside. It looked as if the group had stood up mid-conversation and walked into the woods. Parents arrived the next day. Ryan's mother brought the photo from graduation. Tessa's father paced the clearing, calling her name until his voice gave out. The air carried a smell of rain and pine, heavy and still. Volunteers began marking off grid sections for search teams. Helicopters swept overhead, their rotors scattering birds into the sky. By nightfall, searchers found the first clue, a single hiking boot near the edge of an unused trail about 200 yards from the cabin. It belonged to Dylan. Tracks around it led in several directions before fading into mud. Nearby, a second item surfaced, a cracked phone with a dead battery. Later confirmed as Brooke's. It contained a single unsent text drafted at 1:12 a.m. "We're hearing." The message ended there. That fragment changed everything. Investigators theorized that something startled them outside the cabin. Maybe an animal, maybe someone else in the forest. Yet there were no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, nothing missing except the 5 themselves. By Sunday evening, Pine Hollow's quiet back roads filled with news vans. Reporters called it the cabin disappearance. Interviews with locals painted conflicting pictures. Some mentioned seeing headlights deep in the woods. Others swore they heard a woman scream around 2 a.m. The sheriff's department could confirm neither. As daylight faded again, search teams set up temporary base at the cabin. Generator lights bathed the porch in harsh white glow. Photographs were taken, evidence bagged, but every image showed the same thing: stillness. No footprints leaving the property, no broken locks or open windows. By the 4th day, fatigue and disbelief settled in. Rescue dogs grew restless, circling the same perimeter before whining and refusing to go farther. Their handlers said the scent just stopped. Rain came midweek, washing away what little trace remained. That week ended with a press conference under a tent at the trailhead. Families stood together, clutching photos. Sheriff Cole faced the cameras and said quietly, "We have no reason to believe they left these woods, and no evidence to show where they went." Behind him, the trees loomed, black shapes against gray sky. The official search paused after 10 days, labeled inconclusive. The friends were declared missing under unexplained circumstances. Locals avoided the cabin after that. Hikers reported hearing music from the trees, though no source was ever found. For the families, hope refused to die. They returned each summer anniversary, setting candles on the porch rail, whispering the same question the investigators never could answer. Where did 5 young people go in a place so small on the map? And how could a forest large enough to hide them remain silent for 13 years? By the time the sun rose on the 6th day, Pine Hollow no longer felt like a place on a map. It felt like a machine built for one purpose: to find 5 missing friends who seemed to have stepped off the face of the earth. The gravel parking lot by the trailhead turned into a command post. Pop-up tents, folding tables, topo maps taped to plywood. Radios crackled with call signs and grid numbers. Someone dragged in a whiteboard and wrote the names: Ryan, Brooke, Elijah, Tessa, Dylan, across the top in blue marker, as if writing them large enough could keep them from fading. Volunteers signed their names and handed over driver's licenses so the coordinators could track who went where. The search boss briefed them with a steady voice. Stay in pairs, mark your path with flagging tape, call out if you find anything. A sheriff's deputy explained how scent cones worked for canine teams and why they needed quiet. When a dog lifted its head to catch a trace, people nodded, grateful to be told what to do. It gave their fear somewhere to stand. The dogs started along the old logging road first, noses carving invisible lanes in the air. Their handlers watched for the tiny changes, the quick head turn, the sharpened pull on a lead. That could mean scent. One dog gave a brief alert near the creek bend and led its handler in a tight loop through brush. They found nothing but a hair tie tangled around a twig. It could have been anyone's, the deputy said gently, but they bagged it anyway. Helicopters thumped overhead, dragging air across the treetops. The pilots flew slow, low, trying to peer through a canopy that braided shadow into patterns even trained eyes struggled to read. A state police crew brought a FLIR unit to detect heat signatures. The screen showed blotches of white that were only sun-warmed rocks and deer beds. It was too late in the season for anyone to leave a thermal print that made sense. Divers worked the lake. They advanced in measured sweeps, feeling along the bottom with gloved hands. Visibility reduced to inches. They surfaced with silt-blackened faces and shook their heads. A fisherman pointed them toward the deep hole near the old dock. They descended, followed a line, found a rusted anchor and a shopping cart locals swore had never been there. The wrong kind of discovery. Inside the cabin, detectives treated every inch like a page. They dusted the doorknobs and the kitchen table, lifted prints that meant only the group had been there. The lock worked perfectly. The windows slid and latched without complaint. On the bathroom mirror, the heat left from a shower had long since vanished. But they photographed the glass anyway, just in case some trace remained. In the trash, they found 2 ramen packets, a grocery receipt, an empty headache bottle. Nothing pointed outward. Everything pointed back to the same question. Why would 5 people leave? Without shoes, without wallets, without phones. And where would they go? The town filled with stories in the vacuum of answers. A mechanic swore he saw headlights on Ridge Spur at 2 in the morning, even though the road was blocked a mile up by a fallen tree. A couple from a rental cabin said they heard an argument around the hour the playlist stopped. By the next day, they were sure they'd heard a woman cry out. And by the day after that, the memory felt like a movie they'd seen, rather than something they'd lived. A retired logger insisted there was an unmarked shaft somewhere beyond the creek, where the company had once stored gear. He'd tried to find it a decade ago and failed. The map showed no such place, but searchers marked the idea with a question mark anyway, because certainty had grown rare. On the 7th day, a volunteer found a scrap of blue fabric snagged on a branch along a faint deer path. It matched the color of the jacket Brooke wore in the last photo. The sheriff's office sent it to the lab with the care reserved for something that might be the first honest breadcrumb. While they waited, hope grew teeth and chewed at everyone. Parents drifted between the command post and the cabin porch, hovering in doorways, careful not to disturb what the detectives called the scene and what they still called their children's weekend. A rumor hardened into a theory. A survivalist had been seen in these woods the prior month, a man who didn't like visitors and didn't bother to hide it. Deputies drove to a shack marked on a local's hand-drawn map. The man sat on his stoop with a coffee can for an ashtray and a face the weather had used as a practice field. He said he'd been gone that weekend hauling scrap downstate. They checked, he had. People stopped whispering his name, but they didn't stop needing someone to carry the blame. The lab called about the blue fabric on day 9. It was polyester, weathered and sun-bleached. No DNA left to grab. It could have been hers or it could have been anyone's. The whiteboard in the command tent developed a new column. Maybe. Under it, The list grew until it started to look like a prayer spoken through gritted teeth. By now, the search had pulled in specialized teams, mounted units to navigate marshy ground without tearing the soil, rope crews to peer into narrow cuts that swallowed light, grid leaders trained to walk a line and notice when a single leaf sat wrong. People admired their calm and borrowed it. When another thunderstorm rolled in and hammered the forest, those leaders just adjusted the plan and kept moving, as if stubbornness itself might make the woods give back what it had taken. On the 10th night, the command post lights glowed against a low ceiling of cloud. Reporters waited for the update they dreaded and expected. Sheriff Cole stepped to the microphones, eyes rimmed in the kind of fatigue that doesn't sleep off. He thanked the volunteers, the state crews, the pilots and divers. He explained they had covered every grid they could cover twice, that they had no sign of foul play, and no sign of the 5 leaving the area on foot or by car. He said the official search would scale back at dawn, not end, because ending sounded like surrender. After the cameras clicked and folded away, the family stood in a hush that had weight. Brooke's mother held her daughter's jacket to her chest, the one from graduation day. Not the blue one that might have been a lead or might have been a stranger's forgotten windbreaker. Ryan's father stared into the tree line as if memorizing the pattern of trunks would allow him to see the one thing everyone else had missed. A deputy offered to drive them back to town. They stayed until the generators were switched off and the forest reclaimed the dark. The following morning, the searchers who remained moved slower, not from lack of will, but from the bone-deep understanding that effort and outcome had parted ways. The woods felt larger than before, both closer and more indifferent. Someone found a set of small, circular impressions in damp soil near the far boundary of the property. They were evenly spaced and led nowhere. A ranger said they looked like the feet of an old ladder pressed against the ground and lifted away again. They flagged it, photographed it, and came back with a tape measure. The marks were 3 feet apart. The team couldn't reconcile that with anything they knew about the cabin or the trails, so they filed it with the rest of the maybe. By the end of the 2nd week, the town had spent itself. The whiteboard names remained, but the ink lost its shine. The cabin sat as it had on day 1, locked, orderly, waiting for footsteps that never returned. The parents carried boxes of flyers back to their cars, promising each other they would print more, that they would call the sheriff again next week, that they would not let the calendar change the shape of their children's absence. When they finally left the gravel lot, the silence that followed felt like a decision the forest had made. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that the only witness left was a canopy so dense it learned to keep secrets, and that 13 years later, when a small machine rose into that same sky with a buzzing that meant nothing to the trees, it would look down through a seam of leaves and notice a shape human eyes had failed to name. The official search wound down quietly, but the case refused to settle. For a while the story lived on in the town's air, repeated in small doses. The 5 friends, the locked cabin, the woods that swallowed them whole. Then came the season when the leaves dropped, and people stopped talking about it aloud. In the sheriff's office, though, the file kept growing, a folder that refused to close. Cole's team followed procedure. Every tip, every rumor, every name scribbled on a napkin went into the log. A park ranger reported a makeshift fire pit miles from the cabin. Deputies hiked out and found a circle of stones and charred wood too old to matter. A hunter swore he'd heard voices one dawn deep in the northern hollow. Searchers returned, found a collapsed tent and 2 beer cans rusted into the soil. The labels dated 3 years before the disappearance. The problem wasn't a lack of information. It was the kind that couldn't be weighed. Phone companies supplied records that showed the friends' devices had stopped pinging all at once. Around the same hour, Brooke's unfinished text was written. Analysts mapped the coordinates and drew circles that overlapped until they formed a single dot, somewhere in the valley south of the cabin. Ground teams combed that section 3 separate times. They found a nest of animal bones, a pair of broken sunglasses, and nothing else. The case files show how the investigation kept mutating. By spring, the missing persons unit had cycled through a half-dozen theories. 1. They'd gone for a late-night walk and gotten lost, panic leading them in circles until exhaustion set in. 2. An unknown person intercepted them, perhaps a robbery that spiraled. 3. An accident involving the lake, though the divers' repeated sweeps made that less likely. There were sketches of the terrain, logs of scent trails that evaporated mid-map, lists of interviewees. Each conclusion ended in the same handwriting. Cole's one word written in the margin: inconclusive. The human side frayed. Ryan's parents hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Caldwell, who believed in the simplest explanations. He camped near the cabin for a week, mapping elevation lines and running soil density tests around the porch, as if a clue might have been buried just beneath view. His report ran 43 pages and ended with a single line: no evidence of departure by known paths. Elijah's older sister started a blog that mixed police updates with her own theories. She built a small following of strangers who diagrammed timelines and scoured satellite images. A few thought the group might have been victims of illegal logging or hidden chemical dumping. Others spun stranger tales about secret tunnels or the forest itself acting as a trap. When nothing new emerged, the online interest moved on to the next missing person thread. The family stayed. For the sheriff's office, active investigation meant a drawer that opened every few months when a new lead appeared. In year 5, a hiker turned in a water bottle found half buried near the ridge, faded initials scratched into plastic. T Forensics confirmed it wasn't Tessa's brand, not even the same color. Year 6 brought a skull fragment mailed anonymously to the station, postmarked 2 states away. It turned out to be animal. After year 8, reporters stopped asking questions unless it was anniversary week. Cole retired. His successor kept the file in the same drawer. The cabin changed owners twice. Both refused to rent it. Teenagers used the clearing for dares, breaking the quiet with flashlights and laughter, until nerves sent them sprinting back to their cars. By year 10, each family dealt with loss in their own weathered way. Ryan's mother still called the sheriff's office once a month just to check. Brooke's father donated to search and rescue units in other states because it felt like progress somewhere. Dylan's younger brother moved away and stopped using his last name for a while, tired of introductions that ended in awkward silence. There were still moments when the story tried to surface. A local paper ran a short piece about unsolved disappearances. The photo caption misnamed one of the friends. An online commenter claimed to have found a new lead, attaching grainy GPS images that turned out to be years old. None of it changed the weight in those woods or the empty cabin that stood as quietly as ever. The investigation's last official entry came in year 11. A forestry crew cutting a new fire break north of the property reported a sunken patch of soil and what looked like old rope protruding. Deputies arrived, examined it carefully. The rope was nylon, frayed, tied to nothing. They filed a brief note: no relation to case. That was the last piece of paper slid into the file. Somewhere beneath all the reports and measurements, a different kind of record existed. The private map each family carried, the one that started with hope and bent slowly toward exhaustion. Every theory had been tried, every place named. There was no final dot to close the trail. The case settled into that strange category detectives never like to admit exists. The kind that simply stops. And yet, in a separate notebook kept by Elijah's mother, there was a handwritten line dated on the 13th anniversary. The woods don't lose things. They just hold them until we learn how to look. By the time the 13th year arrived, the story of the 5 friends had become something Pine Hollow lived with, the way it lived with the changing seasons. Every town has a ghost that never quite leaves. This one had 5. The cabin still stood, its cedar planks silvered with weather, porch rails sagging slightly under moss. The property had passed through 2 hands and then none. The last owner never moved in, deciding to let the forest have it. Teenagers still dared each other to drive out at night, to shine their phone lights on the windows. Most didn't last 5 minutes before panic set in. Down in town, the sheriff's office kept the file in a gray cabinet. The edges of the papers had curled from years of handling. New deputies leafed through it sometimes, like a ritual, trying to imagine the moment 5 lives could vanish between one heartbeat and the next. The older deputies said there was nothing left to find. Families aged visibly in those 13 years. Ryan's mother still organized the annual vigil at the trailhead, candles lined up along the wooden fence, a few framed photos darkened by drizzle. Brooke's younger sister, now with 2 children of her own, read a letter aloud each year that began the same way. We still remember the sound of your laugh. Reporters occasionally resurfaced the story in anniversary features. Each time, the details blurred a little more. Some outlets claimed a 6th person had been with them. Others said the cabin was destroyed by fire. The truth was less dramatic. Everything remained exactly where it had been left. The drone era had arrived quietly during those years, changing the way the world looked at places like Pine Hollow. Cheap aerial cameras showed new angles on familiar ground. People mapped their properties, surveyed damage after storms, or filmed cinematic hiking videos for social media. The forest that had once seemed impenetrable now had eyes above it. For most, this shift meant convenience. For one person, it became an obsession. Nathan Heller was 23 the summer he came back. Dylan's younger brother, the one who'd moved away and tried to shed the name. He'd gone into film school, learned editing, story structure, the mechanics of how people look for meaning. His thesis had been about disappearances, the space between evidence and myth. After graduation, he returned to Pine Hollow with a small grant to produce a short documentary, The Cabin That Took 5. Locals treated him with wary kindness. They'd seen what reopening old wounds did to the families, but Nathan wasn't there to chase theories. He wanted to film the place as it was now, the cabin aging in silence, the forest swallowing its edges, the faint trail where volunteers had once walked shoulder to shoulder. He said he wanted to capture absence. He spent weeks collecting footage, sunlight through the trees, the slow drift of mist across the lake, the whiteboard still stored in a shed behind the sheriff's office. He shot long static frames, the kind editors call breathing shots, to let an audience feel the emptiness. But something in him resisted keeping it purely artistic. He began reviewing the old police maps, tracing search grids, marking coordinates of every recorded clue, the boot, the phone, the fabric. The circle they formed wasn't perfect, but it left a small patch of forest unsearched, a narrow ravine to the east of the creek. He didn't tell anyone he noticed it, not yet. One late afternoon, he hiked out alone with a drone packed in his bag. The forest was different now, thicker in some places, young trees crowding the clearings where searchers once stood. The old cabin leaned slightly, its doors swollen shut from rain. He set the drone on the porch rail, synced the controller, and watched the rotors spin up into a blur. It rose above the roofline, climbed higher, steady as a held breath. Through the small screen, the forest looked endless and strangely organized, every tree a column in a green cathedral. He guided the drone toward the coordinates on his notebook, down the slope, over the creek, across a wedge of terrain where the canopy folded tight. The camera adjusted for light, flickered, then stabilized. And there, through the pixelated shadows, something interrupted the pattern, a patch of geometry that didn't belong. Angles, straight lines, the reflection of metal. Nathan froze. He hovered the drone, zoomed in. The screen filled with branches and a fragment of something dark below, half buried, partially covered in moss. He took a screenshot. The battery warning beeped. The drone tilted slightly, fighting the wind. He pulled it back, hard hammering. When he landed it, the forest seemed to have changed color. The same, but sharper. He replayed the footage. Frame by frame, he watched the anomaly appear, vanish behind motion blur, then appear again, a shape under the trees. That night, he sat in his car outside the old sheriff's office, debating whether to go in. The footage might mean nothing, a shadow, a fallen structure, but it also might mean everything. Eventually, he left a note under the station door. Possible site east of creek. Coordinates attached. Inside the quiet office, the night deputy found it an hour later. By dawn, the sheriff on duty had already called in the regional search team. For the first time in 13 years, Pine Hollow woke to the sound of helicopters again. When the official recovery was complete, the ravine was sealed with quiet reverence. The sheriff ordered the area fenced off until the families decided what should be done. The forest, indifferent and immense, closed around the scar, its canopy, whispering as if it had simply reclaimed what it had borrowed. The public story was straightforward now. 5 friends exploring a forgotten hunting platform late at night, one board breaking under their weight, the rest collapsing in a chain reaction. The fall had been swift and total, the slope deep enough that even daylight never reached the bottom. Time, rain, and soil had done the rest. The media cycle moved on quickly, but in Pine Hollow, closure came slowly. Ryan's parents returned first. They walked the old trail in silence, stopping by the creek where volunteers had once set up camp. Brooke's sister followed a week later with flowers and placed them at the new memorial sign posted near the site, in memory of the 5 who wandered and were found. For the first time in more than a decade, the families shared a meal together. They talked about who the friends had been before the photographs froze them in time, about Ryan's obsession with road trips, about Tessa's fear of thunderstorms, about how Elijah always carried a deck of cards in his pocket. Laughter crept back, tentative but real. Nathan didn't join them. He stayed another week to film what he called the forest's quiet. His camera followed shafts of morning light through mist, the way insects drifted over the new clearing. He spoke in voiceover later, his narration, steady but thin with fatigue. For 13 years we asked where they went. The forest never hid the answer. It just spoke a language we couldn't read. Every tree that grew here held a piece of the story, waiting for us to look from above instead of below. He spent hours by the ravine, listening. What the investigators called an accident had left marks beyond the physical, a sense that time folded differently here. The birds avoided the clearing. The creek below ran slower, as if memory itself thickened the water. When the final report arrived from forensics, it contained the same dry precision as every government document before it. Cause of death. Accidental fall. But even the sheriff admitted it was strange that all 5 had been found so close together, as if they'd tried to help one another even in that last moment. The town's mayor proposed a small memorial garden near the trailhead. Volunteers from the original search effort came back to clear the overgrowth. Someone hung a wooden sign carved with the word, "Found," in simple block letters. Beneath it, a line from Nathan's documentary, "The forest keeps, then returns." The story reached beyond the county now. Online forums that had once theorized abductions and secret bunkers began to treat the Pine Hollow case as an example of how easily nature can swallow evidence. Pilots, hikers, and search coordinators referenced it in safety briefings. Always scan ravines, always map from above. For those who had lived the mystery, it became a lesson in both humility and endurance. Ryan's mother said she still felt him there, not as a ghost but as a presence that made her stop and listen whenever the woods went completely silent. Elijah's sister kept the drone frame Nathan had given her, printed and mounted. Brooke's father started volunteering for missing person searches in neighboring states, saying that understanding the lost meant never assuming they'd simply vanished. As for Nathan, the documentary went live 6 months after the discovery. It ran 27 minutes and ended not with the footage of bones or wreckage, but with a long, unbroken shot of the forest canopy as seen from the drone. The caption read, "Sometimes what we call mystery is just the patience of the world waiting for us to notice." Viewers responded in waves, comments filled with gratitude, sorrow, and the eerie recognition that the story had given back something deeper than an answer. It had given proof that even silence can be truthful. A year later, on the 14th anniversary of the disappearance, the families gathered one last time. They stood at the memorial, now surrounded by saplings that had begun to close the clearing. Nathan placed a small plaque at the base of a young oak. It read, "For those who search, and for what the forest kept until we were ready to see." As dusk settled, the wind moved through the trees, a sound that might have been nothing or might have been the echo of laughter carried from far away. For a moment, every branch seemed to breathe. Then the forest went still again, patient, eternal, keeping its quiet watch.